In step 11 of this Institute of Practical Learning course on self-awareness and human intelligence, we talk about how your senses collect inputs for your mind and how your mind divides them up into different categories and processes them through different paths. And this has a big impact on the best ways for you to learn new information and new behaviours.
So just to do a very quick recap, the real world that we live in is changing very fast, second by second. In fact, a hundredths of a second by a hundredths of a second. It's highly variable. I've gone through in the previous video all the different senses and the huge amount of data that's coming in. Your mind is soft and potentially flexible. You can learn a lot from experience. And the most obvious thing is if you touch a red wire instead of a blue wire and you get an electric shock, you're going to learn pretty jolly quickly that red wires are potentially the wrong ones to touch. And you'll learn that just in that one experience. On the other hand, someone may be trying to teach you the periodic table or the upper Hessenberg triangular matrix conversion methodology for transposing Fourier series. That could take you a long time. It took me a long time. So your mind is flexible, but only in particular ways. What we're going to try and explore together is, where is your mind flexible? What can you change? What part of your mind can you not change? But how can you adapt the fact that, okay, there's stuff you can't change, but you can make it more useful to your purpose. And I'll be coming back to that later. In fact, what I'm going to do is make a little note for myself here, because I do want to, I was seeding the word purpose there. I want to come back to purpose. So I'll pop it up here. Okay. So we've talked about that. I've talked to you probably at more length than you'd like about computers and the academic world and the fact that computers are basically hardwired. You can put new data into them, but the way they process that data is pretty set within the wiring of the computer, within the program that it runs, within something halfway between the two, which is called firmware, and also within the applications. But the applications follow set rules, set procedures, and they're only variable within certain parameters. So that's your computer side of things. And then if you look at the academic year as you were taught at school, that pretty much only changed year by year. So your teacher or your lecturer would have had a set of course material called the syllabus that they have to teach you in that year or that term. They're not allowed to change that. In fact, teachers complain a lot about how restrictive they are because they'd love to be teaching you other stuff, but they can't. So it's all very fixed. But the real world you live in, when you walk out of the door of whichever room you're in, everything outside won't be the same as when you walked inside. A lot of it could be dramatically changed, hopefully for you not too dramatically changed. But it's a very changing world, and as a human being, you have to learn to adapt to it. If you're ambitious or just want to be happy, you've got to learn that flexibility to adapt. I'm going to create some space for myself, actually. Okay, now the other thing we were talking about, I was talking to you about how your mind, very simplistically saying, because your mind is fiendishly complicated, but we can think of it as a conscious aspect of it and the unconscious aspect. For example, on this side of the fence might be your short-term memory. So if I tell you 6 numbers now or 8 numbers, how many of them can you actually remember 30 seconds later? So if I say to you 3.14159265358 and we wait 30 seconds, how many of those would you remember? Probably not too many. Most people remember about 7. On the other hand, if that particular number, which is the value of pi, I think, if I remember it correctly, goes into a different part of your memory, then you can remember it because it has a purpose. It has meaning. And stuff that has meaning and purpose, you can remember. But the short-term memory stuff, you can't. It doesn't work. So there are these paths to learning, and the conscious path and the unconscious path. When people are trying to teach you stuff, and I think the previous video would have had some of this, most education, most teaching is about facts and it's about rules. It's standards. So if you want to make water, you combine 2 bits of hydrogen with 1 bit of oxygen, and there's a way to combine them, and you finish up with H2O, which is water. And then if you want to split water into oxygen and hydrogen, there's a way to do that as well. You bang a couple of electrodes in, and that's about like that. And you can create the 2 gases. Unlike most chemistry, which is jolly hard to undo. Anyway, you learn those facts at school. Now, procedures and methods, I want to clarify here. For me, there is a difference between protocols and standard rules, and then procedures and methods, which is much more about how do you get results? What do you need to do in order to achieve something? And what methods should you adopt? Now, those generally you learn through your unconscious. Those are predominantly learned like that. So take, for example, crossing the road. You'll know that when you want to cross the road, you're taught as a kid, you look left, you look right, and then you look left again, or vice versa. And then when it's safe, you go. Now, but actually, that's a set rule. But then when you go out into the real world to apply it, there may be a reason. It may be a one-way street. So what's the point in looking left or looking right? It's a one-way street. You have to adapt the rule. So you build procedures for yourself. Or there may be traffic lights or a sign that says, go now, beep, 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 walk, walk. So you're adapting all the time in the real world. So even though you had a set rule, you learn procedures and they become your rules, how you approach things. So this nearly all comes in via your subconscious. Experiences. If you think about, it's very hard to learn a lot from a teacher giving you particular experiences. If they're a good teacher, they'll expose you to certain situations. For example, in business, you write business simulations, and then you set teams of people up so that they compete with each other, and they have an experience which is a bit like business. You get a lot of that at good business schools. And in fact, part of my job was to write those business simulations for people to do. But mostly your experiences come into you from your subconscious. So there's a little bit of experience that you can teach like this, but nearly all of it comes in this way. Now, the reason I'm talking to you about this is your subconscious. When I teach, I'm very mindful that I need to expose people to experiences via their subconscious mind. So I will intentionally choose a task for them to perform, which I know while they perform that task, there will be certain experiences that they have. So I might say to them, I want you to present a camera and I want you to talk about, and I'll give them a list of things to talk about. And they might be quite tricky things they're perhaps not by their nature already aware of. An example is, I want you to talk about your self-awareness or something like that. Now, people are generally speaking aren't self-aware. You'll become self-aware because I'm going to show you how to do it. I asked them to talk about what impacted their conversation or their style or what mood were they in, these kinds of things. And it's jolly hard for them to remember and think about it. But if you can prompt them, you can, as it were, stimulate them to have particular types of experience. Without me giving them any rules, they have that experience, and then through their subconscious, they learn. And finally, there's this whole thing of concepts.
At the end of the lecture, we invite you to think about the knowledge that you have already in your mind. And was that taught to you, or did you teach it to yourself? And also the rules by which you live your life and the behaviours that you have. And start thinking about how you might need to change those and indeed improve them now you are an adult and have ever increasing responsibilities, quite possibly, for yourself and maybe even for other people, whether it's in business as a manager or in a family environment. But there is a need, as one grows older, to undertake different ways of thinking and behaving if you are going to be a happy member of society. And that's what we're trying to do here. Good luck. These lectures on self-awareness are practical. The idea is that we select out from the experience that you have those categories of inputs or information, what you're hearing, and we divide them into meaningful different classes of knowledge. Now, this is very different to Aristotelian. Aristotle had 10 categories, I think. Immanuel Kant came up with 12 categories. There was a guy called René Descartes, who was the guy that produced analytical geometry, the original coordinate system for modeling circular motion and stuff like that. So what we're doing is we've taken from that, we've taken the best of all that stuff, but we've also realized that in the modern world, you can't just disappear off into philosophical meditations. You have to be practical. You have to be fast. So we've divided knowledge up and the inputs you get into things like what's a fact, who's telling you a fact, and who's actually expressing an opinion, and various other differences in what goes on around you, and especially what goes on inside your mind. Because these categories which we've developed here are based on practical experience of the thinking process that goes on inside your mind. And what we're doing is helping you build a model which will assist you to understand yourself on your own thinking process. Now, the later part of this lecture goes on to start talking about mathematical models. And it again goes back to the time of Aristotle and draws on what are called dialectics. Now, dialectics are useful for analyzing an analog world as opposed to a digital world. Dialectics offer you the opportunity to analyze things on the basis of from one thing to another. So, for example, if you're in a room and the light is either on or off, that's pretty simple. But a dialectic will help you analyze, say there was a dimmer switch on the electric. So you could have the light off or partially on or quite nearly fully on or fully on. And dialectics can help in that sort of way. And there are various other things drawn from philosophy that enable us to use things like opposed dialectics. So it's all simple and easy for you to apply, but it's actually created by a very sophisticated synthesis of all these deep philosophical things.
But the important thing is you don't have to go into that cesspit of mental agonizing in order to find the gold. That's really important for you to live a practical life. We've done that. We've picked out the really important concepts and we are showing them to you here in very simple ways. And you do not need to go and study philosophy and Aristotle and Kant and Spinoza and all the rest of that stuff. Leave that to other people or to yourself in your own spare time. But right now, focus on what's important. Stay practical. And once you've grasped concepts and understood the models, start using them as quickly as you can, because your learning will increase through practice and practical use of this way of thinking. And good luck again.